Titled this presentation The Hijacking of America, because that's exactly what it was. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. These are my credentials, so to speak. I was a police officer for about 8 years. I have a whole bunch of worthless degrees and a bunch of law enforcement subjects I'll never use again. And I have a ton of training in investigations. I was a crime scene investigator for many years. And so coming into investigating the Kennedy assassination, I feel as though my results that I've gotten are directly connected to the training that I had back when I was a police officer. Unfortunately, police have gone out of control in this country, and I really kind of, part of me regrets ever having done that job, but I did learn a whole lot, particularly in as far as investigations go. Okay, so basically in solving the Kennedy assassination, the closest analogy that I can really come up with on how to explain how to put things together is really just kind of it's like a logic problem. You'll show people your work and they'll be like, well, prove it. Well, a lot of times you can't prove things in the traditional sense, but as I'll demonstrate, as you can solve logic problems, you can solve the Kennedy assassination, as it is really just a complex logic problem. So this is a simple logic problem. Fill in the blank. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, blank, 7, 8. Now it's obviously 6. But if I were to ask you to prove it, could you prove it? No, you really couldn't, because I could have been thinking of any number there. And then the pattern after that would have included a representation of this number. So let me move to the next one. This would be a moderate logic problem. And here it is. Jack is looking at Anne. Anne is looking at George. Jack is married. George is not. And we don't know if Anne is married. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? So this is your typical logic problem that you get in like the Sunday paper. And the answer to this one is yes. If Anne is married, then she is married and looking at George, who is unmarried. If Anne is unmarried, then Jack, who is married, is looking at her. Either way, the statement is correct. And so by going through various circumstances, pieces of physical evidence, witness testimony, you can basically reassemble what happened, and you can kind of eliminate what didn't happen based on the credibility of the evidence and the statements and how they interlock with each other. So the kind of logic problems that I have to deal with, this is the kind of logic problem that I've been dealing with. Radney is known to QJ Wynn by true name. Rosani used the name Pierre with him, but is assumed he has identified Rosanov's true name. Identify Radney, Rosani, Rosanoff, and QJ Wynn and define their roles in the assassination. Now, this is an actual line from a CIA document, and I thought it was really a rather good fit to kind of explain how the investigation process goes. So there are a few key principles that we're going to go over before we actually get to Kennedy. It's probably going to take me about a half an hour to get through the backstory. But the key principles you really need to understand are psychological warfare, which are comprised of propaganda and rumor, spycraft or tradecraft, as it is known, the use of aliases, body doubles, coded language, etc., and plausible deniability. All of these things here, psychological warfare, spycraft, they all contribute to plausible deniability. And that is giving a reasonable explanation as to why you didn't do something. So if you want to understand Kennedy, you need to go through the history of psychological warfare, and that begins in June of 1941. In June of 41, Roosevelt, through executive order, creates the Office of the Coordinator of Information. The OCI would become the OSS in 1942, and then in the CIA in 1947. So this is the definition of psychological warfare. It is really the longest run-on sentence, I think, in the history of the English language. And you can really ignore most of what it says. In a nutshell, psychological warfare is any means to defeat an enemy outside of the normal means of warfare. So not bombs or guns, but information. Psychological warfare is an art adopted to defeat the enemy's will to fight. It is predominantly aims to win the battle before it starts. It is aimed at convincing the enemy that A, your equipment and war assets are obsolete, B, you are being commanded by inefficient commanders, C, your basic human rights are being suppressed. Thus, a state of discomfort is created in a society, which gives rise to frustration, revolt, and dissatisfaction. So typically, you would use psychological warfare against an enemy. But post-Kennedy really is when psychological warfare operations at home really took off. Right now, this COVID-19 lockdown that we're all experiencing, it is largely a product of psychological warfare. If you actually go through the statistics and the numbers, it is a fraction of the illnesses and deaths that occur every year with the standard flu. And as of April 4th, they stopped reporting flu deaths, and all of them are now being labeled as COVID deaths, even though that may or may not be true. So the two big factors contributing to psychological warfare are propaganda and rumor. Psychological warfare has farther-reaching effects than any typical instrument of war because it is used to shape the minds of men, whose actions in turn shape the society and culture in which they live. So this definition I got here from Wikipedia, and I thought it was rather telling because Wikipedia tends to be like the official story. It's usually the government narrative on whatever's going on. And they actually admit here that propaganda in the United States is spread by both government and media entities. Propaganda is information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to influence opinions, usually to preserve the self-interest of a nation. And it is used in advertising, radio, newspapers, posters, and a whole bunch of other things. We are inundated with propaganda. Like Doug Valentine said yesterday, we are the most propagandized nation on the planet. So in defining one can information on news without verification, content-oriented. Gordon Allport has defined it as, we know that rumors concerning a subject matter will circulate within a group in proportion to the importance and the ambiguity of subject matter in the lives of individual members of the group. Rumor circulates because it serves the twin function of explaining and relieving emotional tension by individuals. And that was stated by R.H. Knapp. And R.H. Knapp was an OSS psychologist who actually helped the OSS design their psychological warfare programs. And we're going to go pretty deep into the psychological warfare that was used in World War II because it has had such an amazing impact on the world. And we will get to that here in a moment. Now, this is the OSS Doctrine of Rumors, the doctrine regarding rumors. This really is one of the most important documents I think anybody can read if they're interested in understanding what's going on in society, in understanding the current narrative or any narrative really, because we are never told the truth about anything. And we have had ongoing psychological warfare campaigns launched against us pretty much nonstop since World War II. Nothing you've heard about any war has been true. So in this document, it goes over how to actually craft a rumor, what kind of criteria a rumor should have, and I'm going to go over just a handful of those today. A rumor it contains striking concrete detail. It often incorporates stereotype phrase or slogan. It contains a humorous twist when possible. It provides justification for suppressed fears, hatred, or desires. It is usually incapable of direct verification. It is neither too plausible nor too implausible. Now, as you go through these and you hear what they are, I want you to think of everything that you've heard about this COVID-19 situation that we're currently in, because many of these apply to that. An effective rumor must take advantage of the state of mind of the people for whom it is intended, and people with fears, hopes, and hostilities, in this case stemming from the war, are affected most by rumors that feed on these feelings. Now, this is our government that wrote this. This is our government that came up with a way to shape people's opinions. I think just that very fact in and of itself is quite frightening. And when we get to Kennedy, you'll realize that the vast majority of everything you've heard, even from conspiracy guys, is complete BS. And most of it is actually a multi-generational psychological warfare campaign. The purpose of a rumor is to spread fear and doubt. One tactic is to plant the same rumor in different places, and it should be used to exploit and increase fear and anxiety. This one really caught my attention in regards to the COVID outbreak, because when I went to the grocery store, all of the shelves were empty. People were freaking out, wearing masks. And so one of the criteria of a rumor is, or one of the goals of a rumor, is to precipitate financial, food, and other crises through their own panicky reactions. And there was never any laws passed, or there was never anything legal or official that caused businesses to close. They did it based on suggestions from the government, and they did it based on their own panicky reactions. Another one is create confusion and nervous bewilderment by releasing or by dissemination of contradictory reports. How many contradictory reports have you heard in regards to COVID-19? A ton. Rumors should capitalize on the fears, hopes, and hostilities of people. They are designed to produce open panic. And it's the oldest story in the newest clothes. That basically means that many of the themes of rumors come from things that we have already, that are already familiar to us, because it's easier for us to latch onto those and then spread that information to someone else. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit. This is David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister of Israel, and he's the man who gave the order to assassinate John F. Kennedy. Now, in order to understand that, we really need to go back in time a long ways to 1895 or so, and the birth of Zionism. Now, many people confuse this in conversations I've had, and basically Zionism is a political sect of Judaism, but not really. So you have Orthodox Jews, you have secular Jews, and for the last 100 years, we've had Zionists. Now, Zionists in particular are not religious. They're extremely anti-religious. They are ethnically Jewish, and they are ultimately Jewish supremacists, ethnic Jewish supremacists. This definition says it's a movement for originally the reestablishment and now the development and protection of a Jewish nation in what is now Israel. It was established as a political organization in 1897 under Theodore Herzl and was later led by Chaim Weizmann. So this is Theodore Herzl, and I'm going to go ahead and read a quote that he said. His goal to get a state really didn't start in Palestine. When the first Zionist Congress happened, they discussed, having their own state somewhere in Africa and Patagonia, and then they realized that it takes a massive undertaking to get the backing of the world to get your own state. And so basically, they then decided that they would try to take back Palestine, have a Jewish state in Palestine, and what better way to do it than to say that they're doing God's work, being that they are fundamentally anti-religious, to then found a state on the premise of it was once the Jewish homeland, which is a falsehood. It basically shows you that they will lie and do whatever they have to do, and they will exploit people's belief systems just for their own personal gain. But this is a quote from Theodor Herzl. It is essential that the suffering of Jews becomes worse. It will assist in the realization of our plans. I have an excellent idea. I shall induce anti-Semites to liquidate Jewish wealth. The anti-Semites will assist us thereby in that they will strengthen the persecution and oppression of Jews. The anti-Semites shall be our best friends. Okay, so we have to talk about the Holocaust. It is absolutely essential to understand what really went on during World War II, because nothing you've ever been taught is true. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read this quote. This is from the Journal of Historical Review from 1999. During the war years, British agencies produced and disseminated a wide range of anti-German propaganda lies. According to one suggested story, the Germans were using poison gas to secretly kill off their own wounded soldiers. This manufactured rumor, designed to mislead and demoralize the German public, was proposed by Britain's Joint Intelligence Subcommittee in October of 1941. A facsimile of the secret wartime document confirming this is published in facsimile in the September-October 1993 journal, page 43. So this is the first reference to poison gas being used in World War II. There was no allegations in October of 41 that Adolf Hitler was gassing anybody. This started as a rumor by the British. Shortly after that, in May of 1942, a document called A Commentary on Some Aspects of the German and Domestic Military Situation directly instructs additional attention be paid to the reactions of foreign nations to what we now know were rumors of the use of poison gas by whom other than the Nazis. So basically, this document predates any type of announcement to the world by 2.5 years that Adolf Hitler was using poison gas or had any kind of plan to kill the Jews or anything like that, which are blatantly false. To this very day, nobody has ever produced a shred of physical evidence that Adolf Hitler ever had gas chambers, and he didn't. I can talk about, I can do a whole show just on this, but I'm really trying to get through it to get to Kennedy. If you have any questions about this, you can feel free to contact me. So in general, the tendency in most writings on the Holocaust has been to ignore the difference between rumor and fact. The traditional school considers all rumors fact. The revisionists consider all facts rumor. It is precisely at this juncture then that we seem to have a promising point of departure, since all parties or revisionist and unverifiable reports, that is, as rumors. And that's from Samuel Kroll. Okay, so we're going to rewind the clock back to 1936. Chaim Weizmann was the president of the World Zionist Organization, and he was also the first president of Israel. He made this statement. He said, "It is no exaggeration to say that 6 million Jews are sentenced to be imprisoned in this part of the world where they are unwanted, and for whom the countries are divided into those where they are unwanted and those where they are not admitted." This number 6 million that we have all been taught, that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, that is a blatant fabrication. You have the United States War Department send numerous attorneys and other logistic personnel to go and investigate these claims that 6 million Jews were killed. And Stephen Pincer, who was a U.S. War Department attorney, spent 6 years in Germany and Austria. He investigated thousands and thousands of former Jewish inmates, and he came to the conclusion that not even 1 million Jews had died in the concentration camps during World War II. He said that the 6 million number is a blatant propaganda myth that was spread by not only the Allies, or by not only the United States, but by Great Britain as well. Now, the reason I'm going over all this is because you have to see the mindset of the Zionists who ultimately killed Kennedy. And they did a whole lot more than just kill Kennedy. When they murdered Kennedy, they seized control of our country. I don't really have a lot of time to get into Johnson and his men, but by the time Johnson got into office as president, he had 4 guys surrounding him: Cliff Carter, Jack Valenti, Bill Moyers, a couple other guys. All of them worked for the CIA by that point. And I didn't have time to squeeze it into my presentation, but if you go back to the end of World War II, 1945, Allen Dulles cut a deal with a guy named Reinhard Gehlen. Reinhard Gehlen was Adolf Hitler's spy master. Now, Gehlen knew that probably late 43, early 44, that the war was lost. And so he was thinking more of self-preservation. So what he did was he took all of Nazi Germany's intelligence and he spread it out all over Europe. He had his men go out and bury it, just like they did the Nazi gold. He buried all the intelligence information. And then he went to Allen Dulles, who was in the OSS at the time, and they cut a deal. And so while we put around, 30, 40, 50 Nazis on trial at Nuremberg, we funneled out of Europe and into South America well over 100,000 Nazis, all because of a deal cut by Reinhard Gehlen. And those Nazis went on to work at NASA, like Wernher von Braun. There were dozens who had their names changed and then went to live in America and work for the US government. Basically, there's a very good argument that the Nazis did not lose World War II. Germany did, but the Nazis did not. So the 6 million figure has existed in Judaic writings for thousands of years, going back to the Talmud. This reference by Chaim Weizmann was far from the first use of this figure in modern times. Accusations of 6 million Jews being threatened with extermination in gas chambers and other means goes back to the 1800s. Exploiting pre-existing beliefs or cultural mythologies is a tactic of psychological warfare operations. This is Max Nordau, co-founder of the World Zionist Organization. Together with Theodor Herzl, he made an astonishing pronouncement at the 10th Zionist Congress in Basel, Switzerland. He claimed that 6 million Jews would be annihilated. This was 22 years before Hitler came to power and 3 years before World War I started. And if you go back through the newspaper records over the years, you'll find that the 6 million Jews being threatened with violence goes back to 1899. We have articles from 1905, 1906, 1914, 1912, 1915, 1918, and on and on and on. This is a culturally significant number, which is being exploited by non-religious Jewish supremacists who despise the religion, who despise the orthodoxy. We go 1939, 1940, 1945. Then we can jump to 1991. This article actually came out in the Jewish press. Iraqis have gas chambers for all Jews. And then 2018 news. And why is this continuing? It's the oldest story in the newest clothes, straight from the OSS handbook, actually predating it. The OSS handbook and the doctrine of rumors were kind of a culmination of 50 years worth of gathered information on how to spread rumors and how to shape the minds of people. All right, this is interesting. The first proposal to establish Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Jerusalem, was made in September 1942 by Mordecai Shinavi at a board meeting of the Jewish National Fund, when most of these who would die were still alive. The Holocaust had begun less than 1 year previously. At the same time that the Zionist movement was denying knowledge of the Holocaust, the memorial plan proceeded as if Europe's Jews were already dead. Shinavi argued that it was the very last opportunity to score any financial success. When you go and you look at the word Holocaust, that was really never discussed when it came to World War II until the late 60s and 70s. When people discussed World War II up through that time period, they really did not discuss the suffering of Jews. They didn't discuss gas chambers. They didn't discuss the Holocaust because none of that stuff existed yet. That stuff all came about later as Israel needed further aid and assistance. The Holocaust myth kind of propped up at that same time. So right now I'm going to go through a couple lines from The Holocaust Victims Accused, Documents and Testimony on Jewish War Criminals by Reb Moshe Schoenfeld. Now, Reb is just a short word for rabbi. It's kind of a casual word for rabbi. The Zionist approach that Jewish blood is the anointing oil needed for the wheels of the Zionist state is not a thing of the past. It remains operable to this very day. And this, I think, was written in 1977. As is the way of Jewish people, they first went to the Jewish relief organizations. It became clear to them that pressure of the Jewish agency had cut them off from any aid from relief organizations, both worldwide and local. Now, most people don't realize this, but all the concentration camps had the Red Cross, they had other organizations there, aid organizations stationed, and they were accepting money, they were accepting medical supplies, because during the war, everything was in short supply. And so even just to run the camps, they needed assistance in doing so. And so they allowed organizations to come in and provide aid, particularly medical aid, to the inmates of the camps. The Jewish Agency and other Zionist organizations were against all aid going to the concentration camps. And we will get to why here in a moment. This talks about Yitzhak Greenbaum, who was a Zionist leader, and his son, who had committed war crimes against other Jews and then fled to Israel. And this line here indicates how he really felt about the traditional Jews or Jews who were not Zionists. In his own home, from his own mouth, he had heard the motto, "Death to orthodoxy." He executed his father's wicked thoughts. Okay, blood in exchange for a state. Zionist leaders during the Holocaust did not stop at manipulating lives. They also controlled the sources of finance and communications, representing themselves before the world as the spokesman of the Jewish nation. Now, this is vital, because what really happened was you had a bunch of lunatic, political, non-religious, anti-Semitic Jews. Yes, you heard that correct. Anti-Semitic Jews who basically hijacked an entire religion. If you read through the Torah, which is the opening books of the Bible that the majority of religious Jewish people follow, you will find that it clearly states in the Torah that the Jewish people shall not reclaim an inch of sovereignty until the Messiah returns. So 2,000 years ago, you have the destruction of the temple, which is kind of a big deal right now in Israel, as Israel is trying to dismantle it, and the Muslims are pissed that it was a temple for all. It wasn't a temple for Jews. It was a temple for everyone. And so what you have here is Jews were spread out around the world, and they were not allowed to claim their own homeland until the Messiah returns. Well, the Zionists want you to believe that it is their inherent right to have Israel as their own. However, in the Torah, it strictly forbids that. So the very notion of a nation of Israel as a nation of the Jewish people is in contradiction to the belief systems that Jews follow in the first place. Okay, so this is just this is more about how the Zionists saw the split Jewish blood of the Holocaust as grease for the wheels of the Jewish nation state. And some of the Zionists actually made specific statements on sacrificing other Jews in order to gain a state, which we'll get to here momentarily. Okay, so with each tragedy befalling the Jews in the diaspora is where all the Jews went once they were cast out from Israel, according to the Bible. So we continued employing this principle even during the Holocaust, saving only those who could be brought to Israel. Actually, in 1933, Adolf Hitler cut a deal with the Zionists. It's called the Havara Agreement, and it was denied for many, many years, but now there's a lot of information on it. Basically, what had happened was you have Rabbi Stephen Weiss in New York, who was a rabid Zionist, and when Hitler came to power in 1933, before Hitler even committed any hostile acts towards anyone, actually, he didn't commit any hostile acts towards anyone until 1938. So he was in power for 5 years before he took any action. And we're not going to talk about why he did what he did or if he did what he did, but just know that there was a 5-year gap between him taking power and before he took any hostile actions towards anyone. With each tragedy befalling the Jews in the diaspora, we saw the state as the evident solution. We continued employing this principle even during the Holocaust, saving only those who could be brought to Israel, and that is extremely important because the Havara Agreement basically was a deal cut with Hitler to allow Jews who wanted to leave for Palestine to do so with their assets intact. And somewhere around 68 to 70,000 Jews actually were able to leave. Jews who wanted to leave, take their assets, and go other places other than Palestine were not permitted to do so. And that was in part because of the deal cut with Adolf Hitler, and the Zionists did not want to have to fund anybody not going to Israel.
Coming out revealing secret negotiation between the Nazis and the Zionists in 1933, which allowed German Jews and their assets to go to Palestine. Rich Samuels joins us tonight with the story of the controversy behind the book and the author's struggle to write it. Rich?
Deborah, with the rise of Adolf Hitler to power in the spring of 1933, the Jews of the world were faced with a dilemma. They could raise a cry of protest, a cry few would heed, or they could make a deal with Hitler, a deal that would bring a step closer their dream of an independent Jewish state. The choice they made was difficult and agonizing. This new book describes that choice. The book is called The Transfer Agreement. This is Israel a few days ago, the season of Passover. And this is Germany 51 years ago, the blossoming of Adolf Hitler's springtime. A key factor in the vitality of today's Israel, the book's author argues, was an agreement reached in 1933 between a group of Zionists and the man who would later try to kill every living Jew.
The great irony is that Adolf Hitler became the chief economic sponsor of the State of Israel.
It will be an argument against, and a wrong argument against Zionists.
Some who lived through those times fear the response to this book. The parents of the author feared its very writing.
When your son came to you and said he was going to write this book, what were your feelings about his undertaking?
I told him he's not my son anymore.
The protest of American Jews was heard almost immediately. It was based on only the sparsest of press reports, and nowhere was that protest more vocal than here in New York City.
All creeds, local and national organizations, and labor parties are joined in this gigantic demonstration passing through famous Washington Arch. Rabbi Stephen S. Wise, honorary president of the American Jewish Congress, leads the procession down Fifth Avenue on foot.
Most of the important, well-established Jews were very angry at him, said this was sensationalism, and that if anything happened to the Jews in Germany, the blood of the Jews would be on his head.
Dr. Stephen S. Wise, rabbi of the Free Synagogue and the national leader of liberal thought, speaks in behalf of the Jews of the United States.
This is not a Jewish meeting. This is the conscience of America making itself felt.
The conscience of Nazi Germany made itself felt 5 days later. Across the Reich, Hitler's troops shut down Jewish-owned businesses for 24 hours. Within days, American Jews marched calling for the boycott of all German exports. Jews throughout Europe echoed that call. So did Jews everywhere. But a group of Zionists at the same time was quietly negotiating an agreement with the Nazis to allow the immigration of German Jews and the transfer of their assets to Palestine. That deal, reported in August 1933, was the Transfer Agreement. Palestine, sparsely settled by Jews at the time, was radically changed as a result. German Jewish settlement of Palestine was, for a time, official Nazi policy. These photos of Jewish life in Palestine, along with a lengthy text, appeared in 1934 in the Berlin paper Der Angriff. The publisher, Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels. A Nazi Visits Palestine was the title of the multi-part series. A medal was struck by Goebbels in commemoration. On one side, the swastika. On the other, the Star of David.
In his book, In the Days of Holocaust and Destruction, Yitzhak Greenbaum writes, when they asked me, could you give money out of the United Jewish Appeal Funds for the rescue of Jews in Europe? I said no, and I say again, no. One should resist this wave which pushes the Zionist activities to secondary importance. For the rescue of the Jews in the diaspora, we should consolidate our excess strength and surplus of powers that we have. When they come to us with two plans, the rescue of the masses of Jews in Europe or the redemption of the land, I vote without a second thought for the redemption of the land. This is the mindset of these lunatics, and it is the next generation of these Zionist lunatics who are responsible for the murder of Kennedy, and we shall get to why here momentarily. Allies are spilling much blood, and if we do not bring sacrifices, with what will we achieve the right to sit at the table when they make the distribution of nations and territories? People like Nathan Schwab, they were completely content to instigate Hitler and to allow the non-Zionist Jews to be rounded up, forced into camps, and the camps were brutal. Nobody should ever have to go through what went on in the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. But towards the end, largely, the conditions within the camps were more the fault of the Allies than anyone else. The Allies destroyed the railways. They destroyed any means that the Nazis had to bring supplies into the camps. And when you see the pictures of everyone skinny, starving to death, that is the result of that. The Nazis weren't just cruel and cut people off from eating. They needed them because they were a slave labor force. Not that that's much better than killing them. Being a slave is horrific. But that's basically what was going on. People like Nathan Schwab were completely content to let him do so as long as they could get a state. Only through blood will the land be ours is a famous quote by Nathan Schwab. And he represented the Jewish Agency in Switzerland. Later on, the Jewish Agency in Switzerland will be led by a guy named Tibor Rosenbaum. And we will get to him momentarily. Very important person in the Kennedy assassination. This is just more commentary by the rabbi. Apathy to the destruction of the diaspora is part of the essence of Zionism. The German ambassador in the United States sent to Hitler the minutes of the Conference of Zionist Leaders and the World Jewish Congress in New York. At this conference, Stephen Wise, in the name of the entire Jewish people, declared war against Germany. When he read the report, Hitler went mad. He fell flat on the floor, bit the carpet, and raged. Now I'll destroy them. Now I'll destroy them. So as you can see, these are actual writings and things that were said and done in the era of 1933 through 1940-ish. And all along the way, the Zionists played Hitler they played him like a fiddle, and they instigated his horrific acts that were committed against Jews and other peoples in Germany and throughout Europe. This is from 1933. Judea declares war on Germany. This is the article based on Rabbi Weiss's boycott in New York. He called for a boycott of all things German by Jews throughout the world. This occurred in 1933. Within a couple of months, the Zionists cut the Havara Agreement deal with him. And the stipulation for the deal was that this worldwide boycott and ban on German goods by Jews around the world goes away. And it did, and they got their deal. So basically, they manipulated him from the get-go by launching this in the first place and then going to cut a deal with him to remove it so they can take their people out and go to Palestine. But they weren't saviors. The Jewish Agency facilitated much of the transfer of the assets and the goods out of Germany. But if you did not want to go to Palestine, they let you die. Stephen Wise once said, "One goat in Israel is more important than an entire community in the diaspora." Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. I think you get the point. This is Nathan Sokolow, and he said, "Hitlerism enables us to convert all Jews to Zionism." And they have succeeded. The vast majority of Jews currently around the world support Zionists, mostly because they're really ignorant of their own religion. I hate to say that, but religion religion is the worst thing that's ever happened to planet Earth. It's a bunch of nonsense. It's fairy tales and fables that have been used to manipulate large-scale populations. And then you have the Zionists come in and they exploit the religion of people who truly believe to convert them to their own political means. And they're not even religious. They despise the religion. All right, back to the OSS and psych warfare. What you're looking at on the table is, let me see, there's two shrunken heads, there's a lampshade made of human skin, there's a whole bunch of tattooed flesh. I'm sure you've all heard about this stuff before.
Pictorial evidence of the almost unprecedented crimes perpetrated by the Nazis at the Buchenwald concentration camp. The story in written form is contained in the official report of the Prisoner of War and Displaced Persons Division of the United States Group Control Council. One of the first things that the German civilians see as they reach the interior of the camp is the parchment display. On a table for all to gaze upon is a lampshade made of human skin, made at the request of an SS officer's wife. Large pieces of skin have been used for painting pictures, many of an obscene nature. There are two heads which have been shrunk to 1/5 their normal size. These and other exhibits of Nazi origin are shown to the townspeople.
This is all fake. This is all planted at Buchenwald by C.D. Jackson of the OSS. He was the head of psych warfare for the OSS. All of these items on here have been thoroughly debunked by actual historians over the years. Now, none of these items still exist. They have mysteriously disappeared. C.D. Jackson is a name that you really should know, because C.D. Jackson, while he was the head of psych warfare, after the war, he went on to be the head of Time Life magazine. Do you think it's a coincidence that the head of psychological warfare operations went on to run the biggest magazine in the world? It is no coincidence. On November 22nd, 1963, he also took possession of the Zapruder film. Coincidence? There are no coincidences when dealing with Kennedy or history. So what killed all these people? If it wasn't gas chambers and it wasn't Hitler being completely evil all the time, what did it? It was mostly typhus. Typhus killed 1 out of every 3 people who stepped foot in a concentration camp.
Here he is in all his glory with several friends and relations, as you'll see if you examine a shirt where they're entrenched. You'll probably find that each corner has been used as a nest, and egg production is in full swing. They hatch out very quickly, the warmth of your body acting as an incubator. Hardly a thing of beauty, is he? All the same, you'd hardly believe that this small beast is capable of killing grown men, but it does, by means of these diseases. Typhus and trench fever. These diseases are transmitted through the droppings of infected lice. For instance, lice killed them. Lice spread typhus amongst these. Lice, not bullets, caused their death. Lice murdered them. Typhus, spread by lice, destroyed 500,000, and with it always went relapsing fever. The periodic cleansing of these in a modern disinfector should do much to remove the risk of unwanted passengers. As your blankets are sealed up and then subjected to steam at very high pressure, any stray louse is liquidated. Before removing his clothes, each man receives a numbered disc to avoid any confusion of clothes, and a Dorothy bag in which to place his personal property. As soon as the compartments are filled, the flaps are laced up, and goodbye to any lice in those uniforms.
This little pathologist, he was one of the only forensic pathologists in all of the Allies' World War II post-war. And he, along with the tens of thousands of bodies that were autopsied by other doctors, have never uncovered a single case of poison gas exposure. Initially, it was claimed at Nuremberg that 5.5 million Jews were killed at Auschwitz. But thanks to the work of David Cole, who is a Jew by birth, the Auschwitz myth has been debunked, even though most people still fail to recognize the realities of it. What he did was he went to Auschwitz and he interviewed the tour guide. He interviewed František Pieper, who was the head of the Auschwitz Museum, and he filmed his documentary inside the gas chambers at Auschwitz I, and basically he got them to admit that the gas chambers at Auschwitz I are a post-war reconstruction. It was actually, when you look at the architecture, it was built into the side of a hill, and it was done that way because it was serving as a bomb shelter. And then as bodies started to pile up throughout the war, it became a morgue. According to the, quote, official story, it was then turned into a gas chamber where they killed a couple million people, and then it was turned back into a morgue again, hiding all of the evidence. Now, when you look at things like the Nazis had a full-fledged chemical and bioweapons program. I mean, it was probably the most advanced in the world at the time. And then we're told to believe that they decided, instead of using those chemicals or the bioweapons that were very advanced, they decided to kill 6 million Jews with bug killer, Zyklon B. Zyklon B, in the manner in which they distribute it to kill people, does not work that way. If you read the official stories, it was dumped in through shafts in the roof, and it came in. It filled up the bottom of a hollow chamber, and then within 20 minutes, everyone died. Well, that's not how Zyklon B works. Zyklon B needs a heating mechanism and needs a blower to circulate throughout the room.
Meanwhile, at the rear of the disinfester, the formidable heating apparatus is getting underway. As soon as the compartments are filled, the flaps are laced up, and goodbye to any lice in those uniforms.
Leaves deep blue staining on the walls that is still detectable 60, 70 years later in the delousing chambers. Now, the delousing chambers were used to kill fleas and lice and other insects on clothing and mattresses, and they were used to preserve the life of the inmates because you cannot have your slave labor force dying, okay? So the idea that Adolf Hitler would need a slave labor force to fight the war and to work in the factories at Auschwitz, but he would just go ahead and kill them because they were Jews, is ultimately ridiculous. And then going down here, there was a plaque that stood outside of Auschwitz for many, many, many years until 1990. And because of David Cole's documentary, which I highly recommend everyone watch, it's on BitChute. You're never going to see it on YouTube. The reason you'll never see it on YouTube is because the CEO of YouTube, her father was a physicist who was directly connected to Dimona, which is the nuclear bomb factory in the Negev Desert in Israel, which is the reason that Kennedy got killed in the first place. So that's the YouTube connection to the Kennedy assassination. But it said here for many years, 4 million people suffered and died at the hands of the Nazis. That number was reduced down to 1.1 million in 1990. But the reality is, in 1964, the Krakow trials, the Polish government actually presented real evidence that 300,000 people died at Auschwitz, and not Jews, people. Jews made up less than 50% of the populations of all the camps. And when you think back on it, nobody else really gives a shit anymore. It was 80 years ago, right? But it's still used to this very day to gain sympathy, to gain funding. It is a tool that Zionists use to manipulate the masses into supporting their causes. This is the lid of the roof of an induction shaft on the roof of the gas chamber at Auschwitz I. The problem is that when the Russians took over the camp in 1945, they threw a party on the roof. They had a band play and everything. This is a photograph of it. There are no induction shafts on the roof. They were put in afterwards by the Soviets because the Soviets, before they became our enemy, because we always need to have an enemy, they cut a deal with the British and with the United States, the OSS, to propagate this gas chamber story. But right now there are 5 gas chambers, alleged gas chambers that you can visit. Buchenwald, Kautz, they are all fakes. I mean, when they created these fakes, they didn't even think about things like the Majdanek gas chamber has windows, glass windows. If you have 1,000 people in a room and they're about to die, you're going to tell me that nobody's going to try to get out through the glass windows? Give me a break. It's just utterly ridiculous. This is the gas chamber roof as it stands today. 4 induction shafts, which were inserted after the fact. That does not look like German engineering to me. These are crude holes that are smashed into the roof in a rather disgusting manner to basically give the impression that they were used to kill people. And this is the Rabbi Moshe Ari Friedman. He's a fascinating guy. He has a lot of stuff on YouTube. You can look him up there. The Holocaust is a successful historical fiction, and he is absolutely correct.
رژیم صهیونیستی و حیات رژیم صهیونیستی بر اساس اعتقادی که دارن این هست که اعتقاد به خدا رو در کل جهان از بین ببرن. و همچنین هم یکی دیگر از اهدافشون این هست که ملت‌های دیگر رو از بین ببرن و نابود بکنن، هم به لحاظ فیزیکی و هم به لحاظ اقتصادی. هر انسان معتقدی در دنیا باید با صهیونیسم مبارزه بکنه. هر کسی که بخواد با صهیونیسم جهانی به هر نحوی تعامل داشته باشه، در واقع در برابر دین خودش ایستاده. شخصی که معتقد به دین اسلام هست و به هر نحوی بخواد رژیم صهیونیستی رو حمایت بکنه و با اون دشمنی نکنه، در واقع صداقت خودش رو زیر سوال برده. ما یه مشکل بزرگی هم داریم که بر اثر این دروغ افکنی‌ها با بهانه هولوکاست صهیونیسم جهانی موفق شده که حقایق تاریخی رو به انحراف بکشونه به نحو خودش، به نفع خودشون. در تمام طول این مدتی که افکار عمومی جهان تحت تأثیر تبلیغات هالیوود موفق شدن افسانه هولوکاست رو به نفع خودشون تعبیر و تفسیر بکنن، جمهوری اسلامی ایران در منافع تمام ملل جهان ایستادگی کرد و بر علیه این افسانه جهانی و بر علیه در واقع این افسانه هولوکاست به نفع منافع تمام ملل تمام سعی تلاش خودش رو به کار بسته و ما خیلی ممنون هستیم. خدا انشالله حافظ شما باشه و ما ممنونیم از این حمایت های شما.
So the official story says about 40 million people died during World War II. Out of that 40 million people, a total of less than 1 million were Jewish. And yet to this very day, the Zionists have propelled this myth forward. And out of it, they've gotten everything that they wanted, and they continue to get everything that they want. So back to David Ben-Gurion. 1945, David Ben-Gurion and the Jewish Agency, they create what is called the Sanborn Institute. Now, the Sanborn Institute was a large-scale arms smuggling ring that basically the Zionists were assisted by somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 600 American Jews who would break into armories. People got killed, government buildings were broken into, and mass amounts of arms and ammunition were basically stolen from us, smuggled to Israel to fight the war over there. Now, I'm going to fast forward, 1957, Zalman Shapiro begins to divert bomb-grade enriched uranium from the NUMEC plant in Apollo, Pennsylvania. Zalman Shapiro started NUMEC, which is the Nuclear Materials and Equipment Corporation, and he did it under the guise of he wanted to create nuclear fuel for the U.S. Navy, and he did do that. But at the same time, he smuggled out of the country 600 pounds of uranium, which was diverted between 1957 and 1965. John F. Kennedy knew this. NUMEC was investigated by the CIA, which is kind of funny because the CIA was assisting them the whole time, and why the CIA would be assisting the Zionists in removing this nuclear material from this country. It really goes back to the meeting with Reinhard Gehlen and the deal cut with Allen Dulles. In that deal, basically a hierarchy must have been established, but I can tell you with absolute certainty, the CIA takes their orders from Tel Aviv. And that holds true to this day. And if you doubt that, please explain to me why we've been engaged in bombing 11 countries since 2001 that have nothing to do with us. Not a single thing. I'm not even getting into 9/11, where 9 Israeli Zionist Mossad spies were arrested in New York City. 2 were arrested in a truck full of explosives by the George Washington Bridge. It was all over the news that night and never heard from again.
Well, you know, Todd, it's really an amazing thing. Most of New York City's rescue operations and their police and fire departments have been concentrating their actions down in lower Manhattan, where the two planes hit the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. But some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives. I know that there was police and Port Authority police on the scene, but I can tell you that as recently as 15 minutes ago, Police Commissioner Bernard Carrick was talking about it, telling the mayor about it with a great deal of pride. Police gave chase. They stopped the truck, they found an entire truck full of explosives, and they arrested them. Those 2 men and their explosives are in police custody tonight, and another tragedy has been averted.
The dancing Israelis. 5 Israelis set up camera equipment and watched the World Trade Center be hit by planes. They set up 45 minutes before the first plane hit. They knew it was coming because they were in on it. The companies that were involved with 9/11, like Magic Heating and Plumbing, Denko Mechanical, you have moving companies coming in and out of the building, moving equipment. You have mechanical companies accessing the elevator shafts, and you have plumbing companies accessing the sprinkler system. So people were like, well, people would have seen coming in and out of the building. They would have known if there were bombs being placed in the building. No, they wouldn't, because there's workers coming in and out of those buildings all day long. And when you're wearing the uniform of a moving company, nobody's going to question it. The World Trade Center was taken down with explosives for sure. They found a bomb in a truck underneath Tower 1. That was discovered after the plane hit and before the towers came down. That went out over the radio to the fire department, to the FBI, NYPD, and they got a description of the van that was in there. It was labeled Urban Moving Systems, the same as the van that was pulled over later in the afternoon where they arrested the 5 Israelis who celebrating just like every other terrorist attack you've ever heard of in your life, whether it's John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, the attempt on George Wallace, Robert Kennedy, the 1993 World Trade Center bombings, the truck got led back to an apartment in Manhattan, to Josie Hadass, who was a female Mossad agent. Every single horrific act you've heard about on the planet for the last 60 years has been done by one group of people, and they are not Jews. They stole the name of the Jews to exploit the rest of society for their own purposes, and that is the Zionists.
Our general point that Jews are not Zionists and Zionists are not Jews. The Zionist state does not represent Torah through Jews. It is against, its existence is against the Torah, against Jewish law. Our second point today here is more in details that they do digging up the graves of our sages because of their atheistic beliefs, their desecration of the holy grave sites, their desecration of everything that's holy and dear to us, their behavior and hostility of their police and their government against Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jewish people.
1960, Time magazine exposes Israel's secret nuclear reactor in the Negev Desert, generally referred to as Dimona. Summer 1963, the War of Letters. Kennedy and Ben-Gurion had it out through semi-diplomatic letters. When you read these, you can tell that these guys hated each other. Israel would not have existed without us, and yet they treated us, well, not that they treated us, but they stole from us. They exploited us. They manipulated politicians. They bought off Supreme Court judges. Kennedy was aware of everything that was going on, and he was going to cut all aid to Israel. That is what got John F. Kennedy killed. If anyone ever tells you it was because of the Federal Reserve or Vietnam or some other bullshit, they don't know what they're talking about. The War of Letters explains everything. Kennedy said, as I wrote Mr. Ben-Gurion, he wrote this to PM Eshkol because Prime Minister Eshkol took over after Ben-Gurion stepped down. Ben-Gurion stepped down because he knew it was coming, and he knew that he either had to give permission for inspectors to inspect the Dimona nuclear plant or all aid would be cut. And he did not want to have history have that on his shoulders. So Kennedy writes to Eshkol, as I wrote Mr. Ben-Gurion, this government's commitment to and support of Israel could be seriously jeopardized if it should be thought that we were unable to obtain reliable information on a subject as vital to peace as the question of Israel's effort in the nuclear field. This is what got Kennedy killed. This letter was the nail in the coffin. The plan was already in the works. They'd already secured the book depository. The book depository was a CIA front for smuggling guns and drugs. You'll never see that in the history books, though, despite the fact that the top 4 or 5 guys who ran the company were former OSS. They say they weren't CIA, but I have a letter here I'll show you in a minute that kind of proves they were.